What? You have had nothing today? I could eat a horse now. So, just got back from Daiso, the 100 yen store, where I've got 700 yen's worth of new treasures to add to my Japanese-English marketing collection. As you probably know, in Japan they slap English on products to help market it, because English language equals prestige and quality for reasons I don't quite comprehend. Case in point, this kitchen mat with a cute rabbit on, which reads like a twisted verse from the Bible. It says, "Cute rabbit, and the universe is born from egg, and it'll be heaven for the upper part of the body of a shell, and it shows that a lower part was a place." Wow, powerful words there from the lost chapter of the book of Genesis. Meanwhile, I found this skin cream which sounds like a bioweapon. Fractional CC, targeting the areas of concern. A cocktail of needles and 5 vitamins. Love the sound of the 5 vitamins. Not so sure about the cocktail of needles. Think I'll pass on that one. Also got my new favourite skincare brand, Begskin Science. Begskin. Your skin will be begging you to avoid it. Anyway, Begskin Science aside, it's time for the first and last Q&A of 2024, where I sit down to answer questions you guys have sent in about anything. Japan, travel, YouTube, gossip, I won't hold back. We'll also feature Comment of the Week and Hate Mail of the Week, because not everyone is nice. So guys, let's dive into your far-reaching, profound questions together one more time. If you were an onigiri rice ball, what flavour would you be? Oh, for fuck. With all the trouble of a few bad streamers causing craziest in Japan with their behaviour, are you finding it more difficult being labelled with these groups? Bad streamers, I think it's an absolute disgrace. I'm thinking all the big ones like CDogVA, Premier 2, RobCD, filth, nothing but filth. I don't want to be associated with any of them. Look, it hasn't affected me at all, but I did hear from Pete the other day that he was doing an IRL stream out on the street, and he went to a bar, and the bartender just went, "No, fuck off, just go away," in English. And Peter just sort of ran out the bar, which is a shame because Pete is rather nice. And usually people embrace him and like him when he's out doing his IRL streams. But then I also understand the concern from these places given last year's lineup of dickery. What's insane is, you might recall last year, there was a YouTuber called Phidias who got caught riding a Shinkansen without paying. Albeit not so much being caught, but actually broadcasting it in his YouTube video. If somebody had told me shortly after that, this guy is going to be a member of parliament in the European Union, I would have gone, get out of my ramen shop. And yet, just 6 months later, that is exactly what he has done. He is now an MEP for Cyprus, turning his power as an influencer into actual, real, tangible political power. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, and I actually feel like anything's possible now. I'm practically banking on Pete Premier 2 becoming the Senator for Kansas in 2026. Let's make it happen. Let's make Kansas even better again. Given the work culture of Japan, how likely would it be that you would still be living in Japan if you weren't a content creator? Extremely low. Spurton says, what was the strangest thing you saw during your cycle across Japan? Probably whatever the fuck this was.
How do you stay in such great shape? What is your routine?
How do I stay in shape? I'm an influencer. Of course I have a killer morning routine. Starts every day at 4 AM. It's definitely real.
I down a protein shake and then I do 600 press-ups, meditate for 69 minutes while listening to my favorite self-help podcast.
Count to 3.
3.
Exhale. Now believe in yourself. Believe in yourself or you're an asshole.
I do. I believe. Yeah, I do nothing. I'm utterly hopeless at like keeping a routine. I just cannot do it. I know I'm not alone on this. I suppose the one thing I do is I try and do 10,000 steps every single day. I find doing 10,000 steps a day, you don't really lose weight, you don't get your heart rate up enough, but you do kind of maintain your current weight. Unfortunately, the downside to doing 10,000 steps in Tokyo is the moment you walk past a Family Mart convenience store, the benefits of the walk are somewhat quickly undermined. With the attendance of the state banquet behind you, would you ever consider being an official ambassador if the UK asked? Definitely, I'd be a bloody great ambassador. Get me down the embassy now and let's make this shit happen.
I lost my wallet and passport on the Yamanote line.
Oh, that sucks, man. Well, look, here's 1,000 yen. Yeah, you take that, get yourself some cup noodles, right? Next.
But what about my passport?
Get yourself some cup noodles and we'll worry about that shit later. Alright, yeah, okay. Next.
What a lot of effort this is, bloody hell.
Hashtag AskABroad. Favourite hidden place in Tokyo? I don't know if it's hidden anymore. I've seen it come up more and more, but Hiei Shrine in Tokyo is really cool. It's slap bang in the middle of the city, and I like it for two reasons. Number one, the temple is surrounded by these towering skyscrapers. It's kind of like raised on a hill, and it's sort of boxed in, almost like a castle with these towering buildings. And the second thing is, it also has like 100 torii gates, kind of like a mini Kyoto Fushimi Inari Shrine, but in the middle of Tokyo. So if you can't get to Kyoto for whatever reason, get to Hiei Shrine and try and get there early, because it's quite quiet in the morning, I find.
Bit of a climb though, be advised, if you do come to Hiei Shrine.
Or Tunga says, could you and Charla adopt me as your son so I can come to live in Japan? Yes! Sorry, I mean no. I've already got 2 cats, so one of them's an absolute bloody nightmare. The last thing I need is one more thing waking me up every morning, asking for food, jumping all over my face. Definitely no. Chris Prophet says, did you ever think you would live off being a YouTuber? I mean, for almost half my life, I wanted to be a member of the European Parliament for Cyprus, but that job's been taken now, so that's that out the window. But look, the concept of being a YouTuber didn't really exist when I was a kid growing up. You know, when I was 18, YouTube was only 3 years old at that point. And it was mostly just videos of cats and people crying in a room. There was little indication it was going to be anything good. You know, if you asked me what I wanted to do back then, I probably would have said, oh, I want to be a screenwriter or a film director. I want to be Martin Scorsese. Not, oh, I want to sit in my room alone talking to a bit of plastic about myself. You know, the idea of being a vlogger, a YouTuber, just seems lame. Still kind of does. You know, when you're watching your favourite YouTuber, it might look like this. But don't forget, it actually just looks like this. I mean, look at it. Think of the sheer narcissism, the sheer self-importance it requires to sit in a room alone doing this over and over again. You know, bloody embarrassing. But even when we had like 100,000 subscribers here on Abroad in Japan, I never thought I'd make a living out of it. I never thought it would be like a job. I honestly thought doing this would be more like a springboard into the film industry. You know, that Christopher Nolan, Steven Spielberg would sit down, watch Natsuki the movie and be like, yes, yes, this is it. Call him up, get him over here to LA. The call hasn't come yet. It never will, but I sit by the phone every single day waiting for that dream to come true. Moshi mosh, hello?
If you were an onigiri rice bowl, what flavour would you be?
Motherfucking onigiri bastard!
What has been the most outrageous interaction you've ever had in Japan? I don't know if it's outrageous, but there was one time I genuinely thought I was being filmed for a Japanese game show because the situation was so unnatural and awkward. A few years ago, I was doing the Shimanami Kaido cycle for the first time, the 100-kilometre cycle across the many islands of the inland sea of Japan, which starts in the port town of Onomichi and ends over in Shikoku. And the night before we did the cycle, we stayed overnight in Onomichi, beautiful port town. The plan was to stay overnight, wake up at 6 AM and then sort of begin the cycle. But that evening, my friend and I went down to the port, we had a few cans of beer and we sat there, had a drink while looking over the docks at sunset, the cool summer breeze, the anticipation of the journey ahead, you know. And all of a sudden this guy came out of nowhere. I don't know if he was like a weekend fisherman just chilling out at the port or if he actually worked there, but he must have been in his 50s. And I think he was a little bit surprised to see 2 random white guys just sitting there drinking beer. And you know, he was pretty friendly, started up a conversation, the usual questions.
暑いですよね。
そうですね。暑いですね。はい。
どこから来たんですか。
イギリス。
イギリスの。すごいね。
Now, it's not uncommon in Japan that when you kind of tell people where you're from, they will list off knowledge about that country, right? Kind of seen as playful, friendly, polite. So he was like, oh.
イギリスね。フィッシュ&チップスね。
そうですね。美味しい。フィッシュチップス。美味しい。はい。
あと誰だっけ。ベッカム。デイビッド・ベッカムね。ベッカム。
デイビッド・ベッカム。結構有名ですよね。はい。
And then it began and it didn't stop. It just didn't stop.
ザ・ビートルズね。
Yep. Good band.
ダイアナね。
Oh, yep. Yeah, she's, yeah.
何
Yeah.
ローリング・ストーンズね。
This guy mined the depths of his British cultural knowledge for no less than 25 minutes. It went on 25 minutes of this, listing off names.
誰だっけトーニー・ブレア首相ね。
Yep, the Prime Minister before.
そう。あとデイビッド・キャメロン首相ですよね。
Prime Minister now.
あとなんかストーンヘンジね。ストーンヘンジ。
Being awkwardly British, I didn't want to be like, well, lovely meeting you, we got a chotto, fuck off to bed now, got a 100-kilometre cycle tomorrow. No, I just sat there thinking, with every utterance of every name, we take one step closer to this being the end.
イギリス行ったことありますか？
あと、ロンドン2階建てます。
あ、そうですね。ロンドン2階建てます。はい。
I thought, this can't be right. Like, this, are we being filmed? Are we being pranked here? Is something going on? Eventually, in the end, my friend, who's Irish and therefore braver than I am, just sort of stood up and he pulled me away. So be careful if you ever end up in Onomichi on a hot, humid summer's night, sipping a beer at the port, because Japan's most knowledgeable fisherman might be there, lurking around the corner, waiting to tell you lots and lots of things about your country. I want to move to Japan, but I'm anxious about taking the leap. How safe is the country when it comes to crime and natural disasters? So there's no doubt on the natural disaster front, the country's a bit rattled at the moment after the recent earthquake in Miyazaki. And scientists taking the unusual step of talking about a mega earthquake. And certainly I started taking earthquakes a lot more seriously, having experienced a magnitude 7 earthquake myself when I lived in Sendai back in 2022. Before then, whenever there was an earthquake, I was like, oh, this is interesting, the room is shaking, oh. But after that experience of being in a building that felt like it was going to come down and seeing the studio completely destroyed, that really put things in perspective for me. But that is a risk you have to accept when coming to Japan. The odds of something happening to you in an earthquake are pretty low. The country's very well adapted for it. And you could argue Japan makes up for it on the crime front. You know, Japan statistically is not even comparable to most other countries like the UK or the US. Even something like traffic incidents, right? You're 6 times more likely to lose your life in a traffic incident in the US than you are in Japan. And while things like cybercrime are on the rise here, for the most part, Japan remains incredibly safe when it comes to crime. I think the greatest theft you see in everyday life are umbrellas. So many umbrellas are stolen. But when losing umbrellas is your primary concern, I think it's a pretty good indicator of how safe Japan really is. Now, Japan might be safe, but the internet certainly isn't, and that is where today's sponsor, ExpressVPN, comes in. Whether you want to use a public Wi-Fi without worrying about security, access a website that's blocked in your country, or straight up want to avoid your sneaky internet service provider, knowing what you're up to, ExpressVPN is an app that encrypts and reroutes your network traffic through a secure server in a location that you choose. Admittedly, when I first got ExpressVPN, it was less about security and more about accessing websites back home in the UK that I had trouble with in Japan. But by switching quickly and effortlessly to a UK-based server, I've never had any problems since. Best of all, with multiple streaming subscriptions from Netflix to Disney, streaming services of different shows in every country, and by changing locations, you'll be able to access thousands of extra shows in the catalogue that you wouldn't normally be able to see. No need to pay for multiple different streaming subscriptions, just use ExpressVPN to squeeze the most value out of your favourite streaming service. For example, here in Japan, you can't actually watch Studio Ghibli movies on Netflix yet, if you change your location to the UK. 2 clicks, refresh the page, and there we have it, it's Hello Miyazaki. Find out how you can get 3 months free at expressvpn.com/abroadinjapan, linked in the description box below. And don't let annoying regional internet get in your way ever again. Tokyo during Golden Week. Have we made a fatal error? Flights were booked before we realised. Oh yes, don't do it. Honestly, Golden Week isn't the most important national holiday in Japan, but it is usually the longest. The next Golden Week is April 29th to May 5th, and it typically means during that time people travel back home to rural Japan, or they're just on vacation. And so domestic travel is nothing short of an absolute nightmare. Trains are booked, hotels are full. It's really not fun. During Golden Week, for me, standard procedure is to hide beneath the nearest table and just sort of wait there until the whole thing blows over. What is your dream? My dream is to live in a world where short-form content is banned. TikTok, shorts, reels, all gone. Filthy fast food content for a faltering, attention-spanless civilization. Is it just me, or does anyone want to see Chris in mortal terror? What? I don't want him to die or anything, just want to see his funny Englishman persona disappear while being chased down by a mountain lion or something. Tell me you don't want to see that. No, I do not want to see something like that. Chased by a mountain lion? What the actual... Simon Ziggy Zepp says, what are your thoughts on these incredibly cheap rural houses that are getting the interest of foreigners? It seems tempting, but I suspect not worth the effort. So Japan has 9 million empty houses around the country now, mostly in the countryside, right? And it's not an uncommon sight to see these outrageous deals popping up on social media, the promise of buying a decent-sized Japanese home for tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes even less. I remember when I lived in Yamagata, an Australian friend of mine, he was just working as a teacher. One of his neighbours, a Japanese woman in her 70s, I think, just came over one day and was like, do you want my house? And it was like a big, decent-sized country house. And he said, yeah, sure. and he snapped it up and off he went with a house. And it seems like completely at odds with what we expect in the Western world, where there just isn't enough houses right now. Like, we have the complete opposite problem where people can't afford a house at all. But I do think the idea of buying a Japanese country house has definitely become romanticised a little bit. Like, oh, I'll just buy this house, move in, and it'll be like a Hayao Miyazaki fantasy film. Yes, let's go. No, it's not going to be quite like that. First, there's going to be endless amounts of paperwork, especially if you don't live in Japan or have a visa. And then you'll discover that many of these country houses that are advertised are actually quite remote and isolated, difficult to get to, often poorly connected, and often there is a reason that they're empty in the first place, right? Then God forbid if they're in disrepair because you need to find people to renovate it, that's often expensive and costly. The houses are poorly insulated. And then as an investment opportunity, it's really not ideal because the land prices are going down a lot of these areas because the population is falling. In fact, you might end up moving to a village and in a matter of a decade, the whole village is gone because the countryside is vanishing in both people, population, services and amenities. Now, I don't want to paint this all as doom and gloom. I do think you can buy a nice house, renovate it if you're retired, if you can come to Japan for a few months of the year with your family. I think it's kind of cool. But no, it's just not as easy or as romantic as it sort of appears on social media these days.
Go fuck yourself.
You'd think living in Japan would make you start putting a bit of effort into yourself. This guy's the epitome of the bum look. Messy hair, unkept facial hair, sweatpants. I just can't stand the low effort laziness the Westerners put into themselves. Blah.
Bloody unbelievable. Messy, unkempt facial hair. What a load of shit. Yeah, well, I don't wear sweatpants. When have I worn sweatpants? When have I? Anyway, how about you?
Go fuck yourself.
Having lived in Japan over 10 years now, has the country gotten better or worse in the last decade? The truth is, I think for many people in Japan, you could make the argument that the country has gotten worse in the last 10 years. And rather than me talk about why, I think it's important we hear from a real-life Japanese person, which we'll get to in just a minute. But first, it's important as well to point out, Japan has so many good things going for it. It really is at times like a full-blown utopian society. No matter where you go in Japan, the country is safe, clean, reliable, everything works. That is not a stereotype politically and socially. It's a really stable country. You know, there's never any riots or protests. But having lived in 3 places in my 10 years here, for 2 of them, I'd say life has got better. The first 2 are Tokyo and Sendai, and both cities have undergone huge facelifts. Tokyo's skyline has grown massively in the last decade, practically doubled in size. Meanwhile, places that were a bit gritty and seedy, like Kabukicho, are completely unrecognisable, albeit still a little bit gritty around the edges, admittedly. Downtown Sendai as well has had a brand new station, new towers, shops, amenities. The city is undeniably better. For tourists coming to Japan, it is a completely different country, so much more accessible than it was a decade ago. And if we strip away the dodgy headlines that have been going around about tourists, for the most part, it has been an overwhelming success. 25 million tourists last year, helping the hospitality industry immensely. So taking all this into consideration, how can we say that Japan has gotten worse? And I think for that, we need to look to the third location that I used to live, to Sakata, to Yamagata, and to the countryside as a whole. This year, of Japan's 47 prefectures, 46 of them saw a drop in their populations. Japan's population peaked in 2010 with 128 million people. Today that number is 123 million, and by 2056 that is forecast to drop below 100 million. When you go out into the countryside, you see what that looks like. But rather than me sit here and tell you about it, we do know a guy who lives in the countryside who can explain this dire situation far better than I ever could. So how has Japan changed for you in the last 10 years out in the countryside? Good or bad?
I think maybe bad. Because people down. 特に僕なんかお店してるけど、お客さんはほんと少なくなってきてるね。もうこれは目に見えてわかる。カントリーサイドは特にアーリーショップクローズ。前までは8時まで、8 o'clock。でもね、今6時とか5時とかさ、あと休みが週に2回、1 week 2 holiday ショップ。だから田舎はね、住むのも大変だし、遊ぶところもどんどんなくなってきてる。で、給料も上がらない。そしてタックスはここ20年ずっと上がってる日本。First 3%、after 10 years, after 5%, now 10%.
Okay.
Yeah, amazing. 10%。そしてもう円はもう全然弱いでしょ。 もう半分以上変わってるね。昔80円、今160円、倍違うんだ。だから僕がもしイギリスに行きたいなと思っても絶対行けない。 Don't escape。 俺は日本に囲まれて出れなくなる Like a cockroach。
But is there a good point?
Good point.
Something.
I think この電波、どこでも電波つながる。
Oh yeah.
ね、前は全然つながんなかったけど、でも僕は飲み続けるしかない。 Forever drinking tea。
It is a bleak assessment, but I will say that the standard of living in Japan is still very high, and Japan isn't alone in having kind of a sense of decline. Look at the UK, where by nearly every measurable metric the country has gotten worse. And unlike Japan, it rarely shows. Like, you see it in civic unrest, you see it in riots, you see it in crime. There's a really powerful stoic mindset in Japan that has been shaped by the natural disasters the country faces. And so despite the huge existential challenges, I am somehow optimistic. I do think the country will adapt to the situation and find a way through, as it always has done. Annie Madden says, simplest place to get to from Tokyo that gives a more real-world vibe than the big cities. I would love to travel to a small village, but I don't know where to start looking. Why have one picturesque rural Japanese village when you can have 4? A few weeks ago, a good friend of mine came over to Japan and he asked the exact same thing. He wanted to go for a hike out through a Japanese village. And we basically spent 3 or 4 days hiking the Nakasendo Trail in Gifu and Nagano. I made a video there a few years ago with Ryotaro, but we didn't really have much time, and we had to speed run it all in a car, which is something you should never do. It sort of ruined the magic of experiencing these villages, you know. Although the magic was already ruined by Ryotaro's presence, admittedly. But I knew I had to go back and do things properly. So we went through the villages of Magome, Tsumago, Nagiso and Araijuku, staying at traditional inns, eating local fresh food, with daily hikes through fields, forests and mountains. And it was genuinely, like, incredible. I came back feeling completely rejuvenated after the 2-week cycle. I needed it. It is honestly one of the most beautiful places in Japan. It's kind of what you think the Japanese countryside is going to look like, but better. And so if you do one hike while you're in Japan, don't make it a mountain, make it several small mountains and make it the Nakasendo Trail. I promise you, you won't regret it. Unless you take Ryotaro, that is. Ugh. Do you have a dream video you'd like to do in Japan that you haven't been able to because of logistics and laws? So I actually want to do a feature film, but Japan is notoriously difficult for getting permission to film. It's actually considered one of the hardest countries in the world, and that's why you don't see that many films shot here. For example, even Shogun was all shot on a backlot in Vancouver. And it almost broke the battle-hardened director Ridley Scott back in 1989 during the shoot for Black Rain. He vowed never to come here again. Really good example of this, a recent TV show Tokyo Vice was shot here in Tokyo. They wanted like a nighttime scene in a relatively popular area. They went to the police to get permission, and the police said you have to get approval from over 300 bars and restaurants that operate on that street to be able to film. And the team had to assemble nothing short of a small army to go and try and win over each of those 300 shops, which incredibly they were able to do. And they were able to shoot their dream sequence. But most people don't have the financial backing or support of HBO, so it just doesn't happen. But you can break the rules, as Sofia Coppola did when doing Lost in Translation, and in many of those places they just shot without permission, which allegedly got a lot of the Japanese crew in trouble, unfortunately. Obviously, I don't want to do that, but I do have an idea set in a Japanese sort of rural village, and to do that I would need to get permission and get the whole kind of village on board to make that happen. But it's still early days, still scripting it, still planning it, between everything, and it'll most likely be a thriller set in 1980s Japan, a powerful film of love, loss and desire. It's called Natsuki the Movie 2, coming soon. Puspuskum says, are you planning a new Journey Across Japan series, or never again? Never again. No, seriously, we started Journey Across Japan in 2018 in Yamagata, and it ended just this year, 6 series later, in 2024, and the very place it started, actually in the apartment where I started my whole career, my whole life in Japan, and that is a nice full circle. It's the perfect ending, neatly wrapped up, tied together. I'm really proud of Journey Across Japan, all the amazing people, places, things we got to see over 6 series, and also, you know, during lockdown a lot of people told me that Journey Across Japan helped keep them sane, kind of gave them an escape through the TV screen, so I'm really proud of it. But I think Journey Across Japan is dead. We need a new original Japan travel series, right? And I think it's time for Chris and Natsuki's Jolly Jaunt Around Japan. Hey, yeah, we'll work on that. Sounds pretty bad. We need to work on the brand. And that is the end of the Q&A. Thank you so much, guys, for your many questions. It's been a lot of fun, this Q&A, as always. I'm sure we'll do another one soon, but for now, I'm off to, well, rub some beg skin into my face. I'll see you all soon. And look, I've thought about it, and the honest answer is tuna mayonnaise. Can't be beat. See you later.